Hello and welcome to your Roadmap to Financial Stability, a webinar about personal and household budgeting. My name is Todd Christensen, and I am the Director of Education at Debt Reduction Services. I look forward to presenting this information to you. This roadmap, the budget, is really a roadmap, and it's a very sure way of reaching and maintaining our financial stability. Much more likely to happen, which is much more likely to happen than if we were to try to trust in winning the lottery or expect to inherit a fortune from some unknown relative, or think that if we just invent the next big thing and sell it, we'll make our millions. But financial planning, budgeting, many people prefer to call it a spending plan rather than a budget, which I'm happy to agree with. Budgets people tend to think very poorly of, when actually what they really are is just a plan of our household expenses. We have to spend money. As long as we plan on how we're going to spend that, we're much more likely to reach our goals. Let me introduce a little of what we're doing in this presentation. And who we are. Well, we are the Debt Reduction Services and the National Financial Education Center at Debt Reduction Services. We are a nonprofit organization agency. We are nationwide. We have offices from Anchorage, Alaska, out to Long Island, New York, with our headquarters, which have been in Boise, Idaho since 1996. We do more than 2,000 of these kind of classes out in our communities. Work with more than about 2,000 individuals each year, and doing 400, 500, 600 classes in our communities, whether it's at schools or businesses, government agencies, other nonprofit organizations, and as well as we offer these weekly in our offices, each of our branch offices across the country. Okay, here's what we're talking about today. We're talking about budgeting or planning our finances, and then we'll talk about myths and expense tracking and financial habits. Now, these are this is just one piece of a financial puzzle. Others include developing effective spending behaviors, using credit wisely, and avoiding, minimizing, and eliminating consumer debt, which just happen to be topics that we have available in other webinars that we've created and produced. All right, let's talk about some very fundamental issues when it comes to our finances. First of all, gross versus net. Very simply put, gross is what the government says that we make, or our employer says that we make. It's the money that we see before that's on a statement before deductions are taken out and taxes. So net is what we actually take home. Net is reality. That's what we actually get to spend. Some of the deductions taken out of gross include, of course, our personal income tax withholdings, federal, state, sometimes local, health insurance premiums for many, Social Security, Medicare contributions, and if we're part of a company where there's a retirement plan provided, sometimes then there'll be our contributions will come out. What we're left with is our net income. Typically, it's going to be somewhere between 70 and 80% of our gross, but it could be much lower, it could be much higher. Sometimes it could be 60, 65% is all that we have left over. Sometimes it might be 85, even 90%, depending on our withholdings. So those are typical ranges. Now, why do we care? Most of us know that net is take home. Who uses gross? Who uses net? It's an important question. Sometimes we don't really think about it. Obviously, the government uses our gross income. That's how they determine how much to take out in taxes. Our employers use gross income. That's what they have to pay to us, and then part of that, of course, goes to other entities. Mortgage lenders, if we were applying for a loan, they're usually going to ask for our gross income. Unfortunately, too often we just assume that that's the way it should be, and sometimes we accept what a lender tells us we qualify for, even if our net income would not allow us to repay that sort of a debt. So maybe sometimes we ought to consider providing our net income to potential lenders rather than gross income to make sure that they're aware of what we can truly afford. Here's the problem, though. Too often we think in terms of gross. When somebody might ask us, a friend or family member ask us how much we make, or if we are considering a purchase of a major large item, some sort, we might think in terms of gross income. Well, I make this much money, and that's our gross income. When in reality, we should be thinking, well, this is actually how much I bring home in a month or a year. A lot of people wouldn't even be able to tell you the answer to that question. What is your net income for the month or for the year? When pretty much everybody would be able to tell you what their gross income is. If you don't know what your net income is, figure it out and remind yourself of it regularly, because that helps us to keep in mind what we truly have available for our spending each month and on a yearly basis. Just take your paycheck. If you're paid monthly, of course, multiply your actual take-home by 12. If you're paid every 2 weeks, multiply it by 26. However you want to figure it out, but do figure out what your net income is, and take a look at that or remind yourself of that regularly. Okay. Throughout this webinar, you're going to be given 3 different passcodes. You're going to need these passcodes in order to complete the corresponding quiz to the webinar and get credit for this for attending. So the first passcode is Lincoln. Please write that down, Lincoln, Lincoln. If you don't have a pen and pencil handy right now, just pause this webinar using the pause button on the bottom, and then come back to it and start it up once you've got that. Okay, to continue on, let's talk about needs versus wants. Something else that is very fundamental in our personal finances that too often we don't keep in mind, and that can lead a lot of people into mistakes. Obviously, when I talk about need, what I'm talking about is a survival physical issue. Needs are something that we have to have in order to live, not comfortably, but just survive. And there are very few needs in this world. Everything else is a want, although we have to keep in mind that all wants are not created equally, and we have to remember to prioritize those. We'll talk a little more about that in a moment. There are really only 3 needs, physical survival needs that we have that we can take care of with money. And those are shelter, security, place to stay, place to keep us warm in the winter, keep us out of the sun in the summer, out of the elements, food and water, and protective clothing. Of course, food and water is different than dining out or going out to eat or eating fancy food. Protective clothing is different than fashion. It is simply having something to keep us warm in snow, if we live in snowy weather in the winter, keep us from sunburns and other things in the summertime. So much of this world survives with just a few changes of clothes, if even that, and just simple water or simple food and something to drink. Those are our really only survival needs. We live in a society where we're very blessed, generally with many comforts, and we've come to expect those and to view those as needs, as do our children. Consider a 10-year-old child saying that they need to watch a certain television show, or they need a certain toy, because that's the type of society we live in. We just come to expect such comforts and what many in this world would consider extravagances. Other potential needs, we might consider medicines, certain medicines or medical services as a survival need. Although some of them may not be life and death, those would not be a need. But if it's something that we do actually need to survive, of course, then we need to put it on that list. If we are legally responsible for children, if they depend upon us for their survival, then their survival needs become our survival needs. One other thing to consider a need, it should be a contribution to an emergency savings plan of some sort. Even if we say, well, I don't need that, put that money in there, at some point we may need it. We may need emergency savings in order to provide ourselves with shelter or with food or with some sort of clothing. Everything else is a want. And keep in mind that many people, of course, and you might be thinking yourself, well, how about a car because I need vehicle to get to work? While we may need transportation to get to work, there are many people, we meet them all the time in our classes, and a large percentage of the population of this world that survive without transportation, without a car. It's just that in this country we feel that we need a vehicle. We don't even consider sometimes that we could live closer to work or that and probably come out even in the end financially, or find a job closer to our home. The problem is if we start saying that my car is a need or my truck is a need, then it becomes very easy to justify, well, I need a newer car or a more reliable car or a bigger car, or faster, brighter, louder, cooler, whatever it might be. And so we tend to spend much more money on vehicles than we would otherwise if we consider them just as a convenience. But I would put vehicles at the very top of our prioritized wants list. As I mentioned earlier, not all wants are the same. Transportation is going to be up near the top of that wants list, as are other very important conveniences. For some people, air conditioning is a need. For other of us, it is a very convenient thing that we are willing to put up above other expenses. Okay, I would suggest that you pause this webinar for a few moments and consider some of your own wants. Besides your needs, start writing down some of your own wants and prioritize them from 1 to 5. Put a 1 next to those that are pretty much at the top of your wants, a 5 next to those that are trivial. You'll see that this will come in very handy here in a few moments when we start talking about the actual spending plan. All right, continue on. We're going to talk about the three types of expenses: fixed, variable, and periodic. And the reason we're going to talk about this is fixed expenses tend to be those that are very easy to take care of, or to at least remember. They may not be easy to cover if they're fairly high expenses. And then variable can cause a few more problems. Sometimes they change, but it's the periodic ones that sometimes get us into big trouble. The goal is, as we explain this, is to try and take both variable and periodic expenses and somehow turn them into fixed expenses. So let's just kind of explain what they are and how to do that. Fixed expenses are those which happen every month in the same amount, such as rent or mortgage expenses, payments, car payments. Maybe if you're on a monthly insurance expense payment plan, these are amounts that happen every month, the same amount. And the reason why they don't get us into as much trouble is because they're always there. We know how much they're going to be, and we remember them. Most people I ask how much their rent is or their mortgage, they could tell me to the dollar. If I ask them what their car payment is, they can tell me almost to the cent, some of them. And so we always remember them, and they tend not to surprise us and get us into trouble. Variable expenses are those that happen generally every month, but they can go up or down depending on our usage or depending on price fluctuations. Things such as groceries or gasoline. If you're not on a level pay with your utility company, then your electric or gas heating bill, often and usually there will be an entertainment expense or recreation or dining out. It goes up and down depending on our own consumption. Variable expenses, still, they happen regularly, and we can generally have an idea more or less how much we're going to spend on them on a weekly or a monthly basis. They may cause us some challenges, especially when, for example, in 2008, gas prices shot up so dramatically, and especially for those who would travel quite a bit for work, that can cause a lot of problems. But generally, we still have an idea of how much there is. What we can do, though, is things like put these on a level pay. Put your utilities, contact utility company, put on a level pay. Some people are in the misconception that going with a level pay actually is more expensive. That is not the case. At the end of the year, if you've ended up paying more, in the likely circumstance that you've ended up paying more than what you've used, it actually is credited toward the next month, and you may not even have to make a payment for that month or make a smaller payment. So try and get your utility bills on a fixed level pay setting. Budget, plan for your shopping, your groceries, a certain amount every week, and stick within that. That can make that variable expense more of a fixed expense. The same thing with gasoline or entertainment. If we fix that by here's the amount that we're going to spend this month, then it becomes much easier to remember how much we have. If we overspend one month, then we might need to adjust that budget for the next month. If we underspend, then we can take what we haven't spent that month and put it toward the next month if we want, or put it to another priority. Now, what gets most people into financial problems we work with a lot of people who are going through bankruptcy, and we know a lot of the things that they've in surveys that we've provided, we know what it is that they indicate are the problems, and a lot of them are these periodic expenses. And those are the things that happen every few months, or they only happen once in a lifetime, or once every few years. Perhaps car repairs, medical expenses are huge problems. Taxes, maybe taxes that are due at the end once a year. Children's sporting or school activities, college books for students, appliance breakdown, yard work during the summertime. Things that we just don't think about since they don't happen so regularly. Now, how do you make those expenses? How do you take a periodic expense and make it a fixed expense? Well, we put it into our spending plan. Put it into a savings account. For example, expect car repairs. Know that every 40, 50, 60,000 miles your tires are going to need to be replaced. Figure out how long it's going to be until you know you're going to have to replace them, and put that money away into a savings plan. Same thing with oil changes. They're going to happen every 3 to 5 months probably, according to manufacturers, of course, recommendations. Expect car repairs, expect medical expenses, and put money into a savings plan regularly so that it's a fixed amount, and so when those expenses do occur, we're ready for them, and we don't have to put something onto a credit card, maybe at 19, 20, 25% interest that we just really can't afford. Let's just very briefly talk about balancing a checkbook, because it's so vital, and yet some people just take it for granted or try to do it in their heads. They think, I can keep track of my how much money I have in my checking account. Fewer and fewer people are actually using checkbooks. More than half of all transactions in this country on an annual basis now are electronic transactions, debit cards, credit card transactions. The ones that are electronic funds transfer. So some people just assume that They don't need to use their checkbook register anymore. Do keep track of your expenses. It still kind of dumbfounds me when I'm in a store and in a line and the cashier will ask, do you want a receipt? And people will just say no, and off they go. No receipt, no idea for another couple of days how much they just spent. And now I will admit, I'm sure there are some of those who are very diligent in looking at their expenses online. But if we are not keeping track of our expenses regularly, asking for receipts, and entering that information in our checkbook register, even debit cards, do get a debit card receipt, put it into the register just as you would a check. If you don't use Checkbook, perhaps you're using a software program, perhaps you're using online. There's some free online programs, but make sure that you are tracking those expenses. And on when you do get your monthly monthly statement from your bank or credit union, compare what they say has gone through with what you have written down. Too often, quite often, I hear people who say, "Well, I check my balance regularly online or by phone," but if they're not writing down all their expenses, there might be some out there that somebody might be holding a check. It could be a very substantial or large check. Maybe hold it for a month or two in some cases. And if we forget about that, and that person finally cashes that check, that could sometimes cause some big problems. So keep your checkbook register balance above zero. If you have trouble with balancing your checkbook, do talk to your bank, somebody at your bank or credit union. And there's usually somebody that can help. Quite often they'll help the first time without any fees. If you continue to need help, they may end up charging a fee to help you keep your checkbook register balanced. All right, let's talk about the basics of budgeting. And it might be odd that we're over 20 minutes into this webinar on budgeting, and we are just now starting to talk about the basics of a budget. Those we've talked about, the needs and wants and goals and checkbook registers, those are all vital if we are going to live within our means and live within a spending plan according to our plan. So most people would say, if I ask people what's in a budget, most people can say, well, you write down what you expect to earn, you write down what you expect to spend, and then that's pretty much it, right? Most people growing up, that's what we're taught. Figure out how much you earn, figure out how much you spend, and that's it. But there's really more, and unfortunately, a lot of us don't think about that. Okay, so here's some of the things. Remember, we've talked about some of these. We've got to write down our goals. Without writing down your goal, your budget just becomes an exercise in frustration for most people. If you don't know why you are planning your expenses, why you're budgeting, then it becomes just a kind of we're going to add up these figures, we're going to subtract those figures, and blah 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 blah. It's no fun. It's not interesting. It's certainly not motivational. It's probably more depressing than anything. But if you write down some goals that are really important to you, that you want to achieve financially, and I'm not talking about, I want to retire in 20 or 30 or 40 years and I want to be rich. Those are very generic, long-term goals. They don't help. It's got to be something that you can relate to. It's got to be a goal, for example, that you can achieve on a monthly basis or in the next 3 months. Perhaps if you say, well, yeah, I do want to retire a millionaire, figure out how much you're going to have to save on a monthly basis, because we can't relate our daily activities to $1 million. There's just no way that we're going to say, well, I want to retire with $1 million, or I want to earn $1 million. But what does that have to do with whether or not I'm going to go out to eat for lunch today? I just don't feel like taking a bag lunch. I would rather eat out. When in reality, for people in their teens, 20s, 30s, that $5 a day is quite possibly what will get them to $1 million by the time they retire. So figure out on a monthly basis what your goals are. It might be something as simple as I'm going to need new tires for my car or the minivan or whatever it is. Something that's important to you. You know, it might be a safety issue, it might be an entertainment issue, it might be a security thing. And figure out what that means on a monthly basis so that we can actually relate to goals that are more, $50 or $100 or $300. And that way, that $5 expense, we can relate, oh yeah, that would, not spending that $5 a day will get me this much closer to that $100 this month. The second item in making a budget is tracking your expenses. And what I mean here is, if we don't have any idea how much we spend on groceries or on entertainment or on gasoline, we need to track those expenses for at least a month, if not 3 months. If you've been keeping track of them with receipts already, go back into your checkbook register. You can have an idea of figuring out what we spend on those on a month-by-month basis. Otherwise, we're just guessing, and sometimes guessing is sometimes can be helpful, but a lot of times it's just we're hoping. So track your expenses. Still do work on a spending plan, even if you're going to track those expenses for the 3 months, and guess as best as you can. But find some information that will give you a basis whereupon you can actually get a good idea of what you're spending. We talked about prioritizing your expenses. Do that before. We need to prioritize expenses before we start estimating our monthly income and our monthly expenses. And I'll explain why. If we don't, if we just go right to, well, here's how much I earn, here's how much I spend, invariably we're going to be planning to spend more. There are more things that we can spend money on than the money that we earn. And then we have to go through and say, well, what do we have to cut out? We have to cut out some expenses. That's generally what most people will do. And so you start cutting out the things that just don't sound as fun. They may not be as important, though. If we will prioritize our expenses from 1 to 5 before we add up all of our expenses and our income, that way, if we've got all our expenses prioritized, we can then, after we figure out, you know what, I have to cut out some expenses, we can then go through and find all the trivial ones, all the ones that we've assigned a 5 to, not even look to see what they are, just get rid of them. And if we're still over budget, get rid of the 4s and maybe some 3s. And in some hard months, we have to get rid of some of the 2s even. That way we can get rid of the emotional challenges of getting rid of expenses. Prioritize expenses is very important. When you estimate your monthly, step number 4, estimate your monthly net income. Again, it's net. Don't include promises of repayment by friends or family if they've borrowed money from you. Be realistic. When it comes to number 5, also be realistic. Don't try and minimize your expenses when you first start doing this plan. Don't try and say, well, I know I'm not supposed to be spending this much on this or that. Be realistic. What are you spending your money on? Write it down, and in step 6, where the income has to be greater than our expenses, that's where we can go back and, of course, a lot of people, most everybody just assumes, well, I've got to cut back on expenses. But don't forget that there are also some ways and things you can do to increase your income. There are 2 ways to live within your means. One is to decrease your expenses. The other is to increase your income. So that's the basics of a budget. So why don't more people budget? Because I can guarantee you that only a very small percentage of people that I know and that you know are actually looking at a budget regularly. So what are some of the reasons why people don't budget? We call these myths. People say, I don't budget because, and then they try and justify their habits of not budgeting by these things that are myths. They think it's reality, but it's myth. So I'll give you the myths, and then we'll talk about the reality. Okay. Myth number 1. I don't budget because it doesn't really matter. It's not a budget that I need. I just need more money. And I can hear you give a kind of a giggle in the background, or kind of a, yeah, that's me, obvious. I just need more money. I think all of us would say we would accept more money if it were offered to us. The reality, though, is for most people, it's not how much you earn, but how much you spend that determines whether or not you're going to reach your financial goals. It's far more easy to spend money than it is to earn it. And as soon as we earn more money or we receive more money, human nature says we are going to spend that money. If we don't have a plan, we're just going to spend it. So the reality is it's not how much you earn, it's how much you spend. So if we don't have a plan in place, any additional money we get just ends up going right back out the door. Think about it. The last time you received a raise, you thought, yeah, finally I can do this, or finally I'm going to be able to save money, save more money for retirement. And 2 months later, you're thinking, what happened? I'm earning more money, and I still can't save. Or maybe you win a raffle or something, and you think, all right, I'm going to put that money towards something else, and we still don't reach our goals because any money that we come into tends to go right back out the door if we don't have a plan for it. Myth number 2, I don't budget because I can't. It's just too restrictive. It's too confining. I hate it. When I say the word budget, most people, I can almost see the hair on the back of their neck just stand straight up, because budget is a word that they hate, that we're taught to hate. Budgets are restrictive. They bring up concepts of scarcity and anxiety and frustration. And that's one of the reasons why we talk about, think about it as a spending plan. If you don't like the word budget, it's a plan. We have to spend money. That's the society that we live in. We live in a society where we have to spend money. But if we're not planning on how we're spending that money, then that's where the problems are. So if you just hear one way to remember, or one way to get over this myth is, first of all, realize that it actually, planning our expenses brings greater control and freedom, not restriction. It helps us achieve our goals and gives us greater freedom and fulfillment. Something else, another tip to remember is, if you really are one that struggle with staying within your plan because you feel like you can't do anything, make sure that you put in some what I call fun money. I've heard it called me money or guilt-free money. This is not entertainment money that you're planning on maybe going to a concert or going on a vacation, or it's not money that is planned for anything in particular. It might be $5 a month, it might be $50 a month, it might be more, depending on your own situation. This is money that you have with you, or you can take out in cash at the beginning of the month, that you can spend on the day that you are starting to feel too restricted in your personal finances. And you might use it to go out to eat. You might use it to go buy yourself a treat, to go buy yourself something fun to do, something just to help you get through that a rough day, or to celebrate a great day without having to dip into other budgeting categories. So remember to put some fun money into your budget. And if you're married, make sure that you both get the same amount, and that you do not make the other person feel guilty for how they spend their money. If your spouse comes to you and say, well, how did you spend your fun money this month? You can honestly look them in the eye, smile sweetly, and say, none of your business, because that's what's keeping you within the plan. If it's important, if that's true, then it's important to not feel guilty about how you spend it. I don't balance my check. I don't budget because, hey, I'm balancing my checkbook. Isn't that good enough? I used this one all the way through college. I thought, well, hey, if I'm keeping track of where my money's gone, isn't that what a budget is? Unfortunately, it's not. It's important, of course, as we've talked about, to balance your checkbook. Nobody wants another $15, $20, $30 bounce check fee. And usually where there's one bounce check, there's 2 or 3 more coming behind it the same day or the next day. Checkbooks tell us where our money has gone. The reality is that spending plans actually help us prepare for the future and help us get us to our goals. They are not looking backwards. They are looking forward. That's the difference. A checkbook, it tells us where our money's gone. Budgets, spending plans tell us where we want to go. So it's vital. I think most of us would agree, hey, I don't have time. How am I supposed to take another hour or two out of my busy schedule and look at my finances. Okay, we don't have time because we don't prioritize it. There are other things that we're doing. Reality is, and I'm going to be honest, and I can be honest because none of you are here in the room with me, and I don't see how you're getting frustrated with me by saying this, but the reality is, if you say you don't have time to budget, it's because you've prioritized other things in your life. Look at what you do with your spare time. And you might say, I don't have any spare time. That is quite probably not true. Most of us have time. We either spend it doing other things, whether it's TV or reading books or spending time or sleeping. Hey, I love to sleep. The reality is we have to make time to plan our expenses, or we need to stop complaining about them. And that sounds kind of harsh, but that's the reality. If we complain about our finances and we're not spending any time with them, then we have no right to do so. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Look, if we spend even 15 minutes a week looking at, okay, what expenses do I have to have are coming up next week? What are they? Groceries? Am I going to have to fill up the car? How am I going to pay for those? Am I going to use a debit card, or do I need cash, or can I use a credit card properly to do that? Do I have to mail a check this week? Even 15 minutes a week can be very beneficial. Do it on a Saturday morning, or on a Monday afternoon, evening, or a Thursday morning. Whenever you have the time set aside, prioritize it and do it. The reality is, here's something that a lot of people think, well, you know, if I were rich, I wouldn't have to do that. Let somebody else would take care of all that. The reality is, and if you want to read a really interesting series of books, it's the Millionaire Next Door. There's several of them. But these professors studied the habits and lifestyles of millionaires in this country. And most people, if I were to ask most people, and I do this in all my classes with middle school and high schoolers, I say, what do you think a millionaire is like? What's their lifestyle like? What do they drive? And they'll start saying, well, they drive a Ferrari or a Mercedes-Benz, or they'll go right into luxury cars. What kind of home do they live in? And they say, oh, they live in a mansion. What do they do? Oh, they don't have to work anymore because they're rich. They're worth $1 million, and they go on vacation all the time. They travel the world. Reality is quite different. Typical millionaire drives a used domestic car. They buy a used domestic car. Most of them never will buy a new car. Most of them will never pay more than $40,000 for a car. Most of them live in the same home they've lived in for 15, 20 years. Even if most of them, 95% or more, earn their way to millionaire status. They are not born into it, and certainly they don't win it. Lottery makes just a couple of millionaires a year, a few millionaires a year, and most of those do not stay millionaires. So something to keep in mind when we're talking about this myth about I don't have the time to spend with my finances. Millionaires spend 4 hours a week on their finances. And they didn't do that after they became millionaires. That's how they got there. So if you want to, and I'm not saying that you have to be a millionaire to be financially successful. I'm just using that as a benchmark, that kind of typically accepted as a benchmark in this country. But if you want to reach your financial goals, you're going to have to spend some time with your finances. Otherwise, it's really we can't really blame anybody else if we don't get there. And that takes us on to this next one. I don't budget because it's not I didn't cause these problems. Who do you think most people blame for their financial problems? I've heard fairly regularly the government takes all our money in taxes. Creditors, they charged all these fees after I bounced or went over my limit, or I was late on a payment. The banks charge all these bounce check fees. It's my spouse or ex-spouse or soon-to-be ex-spouse. They cause all these problems. Look, there are innumerable people and organizations we can blame for who has caused our financial problems. The reality, though, is unless we actually take the bull by the horns ourselves, nobody else is going to do it for us. Do you stay up late at night worrying about your neighbor's financial problems? Very few people do. Your neighbors don't. They don't care whether you're going to reach your financial goals or not. They might care about you keeping your dog out of their yard, or and vice versa. But nobody else is caring about our financial goals. And if we don't take care of it, and if we don't set our own financial goals and work on them regularly, nobody else really will. So we need to take charge ourselves and realize, hey, if I want to get to such and such a situation in my life, I'm the one that's going to have to do it. So, and spending time with our finances is vital in getting there. All right, let's go into a little more about, we talked about those goals. Write down 3 financial goals, motivating goals. These have got to be 3 things that are very important to you. You've got to be very specific. What do you want to achieve? How much money are you going to need to get there? How much are you going to need each month? And when are you going to achieve it by? Is it going to be you want to achieve it next month or in 3 months? Set a specific date and then look at them regularly. It's so important that I'm going to ask you to hit the pause button and write them down. Don't start your budget or your spending plan until you've actually got 3 goals written at the top or set down somewhere where you can see them regularly. Again, what is it you want to achieve, how much you need to get there, when do you want to get there by, and how are you going to do that each month? How much is it going to be each month? All right, now if you are married, again, you've got to have common goals. It's not a guarantee, but this is one of the easiest ways to get through all the problems that are caused by arguments in marriage over money. Do you have written goals that you agree on? Write down, discuss goals that you both want to achieve together. Write them down, post them somewhere that you can see them regularly, and that's vital. Okay, now this graphic here is a sample, is taken from the spending plan that we've created. If you want a copy of it, pause this and go to nationalfinancialeducationcenter.org. In our resource center, you can look up budget planner or spending plan, download that. That's a PDF file. But this is what we do after we've prioritized our goal, or set our goals and prioritized our expenses. Write down here estimate our net income, and we're going to use the budget column here. How much are you going to make? Do you expect to make this month? This is net. Do you receive any state income, state assistance? Are you going to be receiving any other income, or are you married and your spouse receive it? So write that down in your budget column. Then, again, we talked about prioritizing your expenses. There's a column on that spending plan for your expenses. Prioritize them there. Again, make sure that all the needs are at the top. Anything that you need to survive, put a 1 on it. Anything that is trivial, put a 5 on it. And for emergency savings, put a 1. It might be, if you're struggling to repay debts and live within your means, it might be just $5 a month. Initially, consistency is much more important than amount. Put in $5 a month. Don't touch it. If you're tempted to put it back into your checking account, open up a savings account or some sort of account in another bank where you are, and don't get online access to it. You make it so that you actually have to go in, and if you want to take out the money, that you actually have to physically go in and take it out. And that'll almost guarantee that it's got to be a really important reason to take your money out of your emergency savings. Eventually, though, you want to be putting in probably 10 to 15% of your net income into an emergency savings plan. It doesn't necessarily mean a savings account, because savings accounts rarely pay in interest even enough to keep up with inflation. Inflation averaging a little over 3.5% on an annual basis, if your savings account, if you're not earning at least that amount in interest, then the amount of money you're putting into that account is losing value and year after year. But the goal is to put 10 to 15% into some sort of emergency savings until you have approximately 3 to 6 months worth of expenses in case you lose your job or get sick and be out of work for a while. 3 to 6 months, it depends on the situation. A rule of thumb I've heard from those who help people find jobs is that for every $10,000 a year you make, it's going to take you a month to find your job. So if you lose your job, let's say you were making $40,000 a year. If you lose a job, it's going to take you on average 4 months to find another $40,000 a year job. Some people it's going to take more. Some professions it's going to take less. You're going to need then at least 4 months worth of living expenses, of rent and mortgage, grocery expenses, and keep in mind that if you quit your job, you probably are not even going to get, you may not even get unemployment. Okay? It's just because you leave a job does not mean that you qualify for unemployment. So take into account that if you lose your job, you may or may not get unemployment, and unemployment is not the same as your current income. It's only a percentage of what your current income is. So keep that in mind as you're looking at your savings plan. Okay, then we can go on to estimating how much you're actually going to put into each of those categories. Again, put those all in the budget column or the projected column. And then at the very end, then you're going to figure out, add up your estimated expenses, add up your estimated income, and compare them. If your income is greater than your expenses, as is this graph on the green chart on the left, then you have a positive net income projected. Whatever the difference is between your net income and expenses, considering taking that amount and putting it toward some of your priorities, some of your goals. Maybe you got a goal, savings goal, you can save an extra few dollars that month. If, as on the chart on the right, the yellow one, you have a negative net income that's projected for the month, then that's when you have to go back and either find ways to increase your income or decrease your expenses. Find ways to cut out some expenses that are lowest priority. If you're not on level pay and maybe it's the winter time and your heating bill is skyrocketed, if you have a history with that utility company of usually about a year, call them, see if you can get that to level pay, and it may make a difference that month. On the back of that downloadable spending plan, budget planner from nationalfinancialeducationcenter.org, there is a chart that gives some guidelines on how much you should be spending on a monthly basis in different categories. Use that only as guidelines. Everybody's going to be different, but if you find that every month you're spending more than you should, or you're over budget each month, then look at the guidelines on that chart. And you might see, oh, well, it looks like I'm spending way too much on my car or on my entertainment or on groceries. On groceries, typical rule of thumb that we suggest is $75 to $125 per person per month in the household. So if you're alone, you'll probably be in the $125 range for your monthly groceries. That does not include dining out. Dining out is a convenience and is more of an entertainment. If there are 4 of you, then you might be able to keep it to $400 a month for total grocery expenses. But typically $75 to $125 per person per month for groceries. All right, here's the second passcode, Washington. Write that down. All right, let's talk about budget busters. Budget busters are the things that we spend $1 or $2 a day on, or maybe $20, $30 a week on without even thinking about it, because we say, hey, it's just a buck or it's just a couple of dollars. It's not going to keep me from reaching my goals. And yet, a few dollars a day can add up to huge expenses on a weekly, monthly, or certainly annual basis. And the opportunity cost, if we had, instead of spending those few dollars, put those into an investment of some sort, even returning average returns over a 20, 30-year period, we're talking about a large cost to us. So let's just kind of go into some of these. We all have our own budget busters, so be aware of that as I go through those. So you may tell yourself, oh, that's not me. Others you might say, oh yeah, that's me. The goal is to keep in mind, to bring this up so that you're aware of what it is that you're spending your little few dollars a day or a few dollars a week on or a month, and how much that adds up to, so you can minimize the impact of these budget busters. I'm not saying you have to get rid of everything, but do realize their impact, and where necessary, we got to minimize, if not outright eliminate these from our spending plans. So, fast food. Average typical week lunch. A lot of people eat out for lunch every day. $6.50 a week. That's only during weekdays. That's $1,700 a year for one person, one meal a day. That doesn't include weekends. That's $1,700 just for $6.50. Even going with a dollar menu, you can easily add up to $5, getting a dollar menu entree, and then add a large drink and a side order. Entertainment, $30 a week for a movie, and popcorn and a drink. That's for two people. That's pretty easily done. That's $1,500 a year. Consider renting movies instead, or buying a microwavable popcorn. For the going back to fast food, consider bagged lunch. Bag lunches typically, instead of $6.50, are more like $1 to $1.50 each. Even if you're not ready to get rid of fast food every day, cut it down by a day or two a week. Take a bag lunch 1 or 2 days a week, and you're going to save yourself $300, $400, $500 a year. And by saving, I mean you'll be able to put that amount of money toward another goal. Gourmet coffee, lattes, $4.50, $5, $3.50 minimum. Some people, I've had people say, don't even touch my coffee. I don't even go there. Again, what I say is, if you are meeting your goals already, if you have a savings plan, and if you are working toward goals, then don't worry about it. If it's in your budget, that's fine. But if you're struggling with your finances, this is where you have to look at. Consider brewing your own, taking your own to work, or cutting back to once a week or less. Tobacco users already know that besides the health issues of smoking or chewing, that it's not cheap. $4.50 a pack. If you're a pack smoker, if you smoke a pack a day, that's $1,600 a year. You might be able to find cheaper. Cutting back, if you're not going to eliminate it, stop smoking. Cut back a pack a week, and you can save yourself a couple $100 a year. Cable satellite TV. 90% of the population of this country pays. If you watch TV in if they watch TV in their home, 90% pay for it. And it's not uncommon for it to be $100 or $80 a month or $100 a month. $80 a month is $1,000 a year for 200 channels of nothing to watch. I mean, think about it. If you could get you could get television over the air still, and it's digital now. 10, 20 stations in a lot of places. And then if there's nothing to watch, hey, it only takes you 2 or 3 minutes to get through that, and then you can get up and go do something more, a little more healthy, or maybe a little more intellectually stimulating. Whereas if you got 200 channels and you sit there and click, 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 it takes you 30 minutes to get through, and you're like, oh, nothing to watch. And then you realize, hey, it's the top of the hour. There's got to be new stations on. You go back and click, click, another 200 stations of nothing to watch. So think about getting rid of cable satellite. I'm sorry, that might sound sacrilegious to many, that it's just impossible to live without cable satellite. But if you are struggling with your finances, that's someplace to consider. Lawn care, $25 a week. Yeah, I'm going to have my neighbor kid mows my lawn, $25 a week. It's worth it to me. If you're struggling with your finances, $25 a week from the late spring through early fall, that could be $750 a year. And you're like, oh, yeah, but it's still worth it. Well, look at your priorities. What are your goals, and can you use that $750 elsewhere? Cell phone, $75 a month. A lot of plans are up there that high. And it may not be the monthly plan that gets a lot of people in trouble. It's all the extra downloads. It's the ringtones. It's the games. It's the wallpapers. It's the applications. It's just $1, and yet we're downloading 10 or 20 of those a month, and that's going to be $500, $600, $700 extra a year. So consider minimizing downloads, or going to a prepaid plan where you can't spend extra money. Lottery. Okay, this one I know I mentioned earlier, referred to it previously, but Powerball, your chances of winning are 1 in 193 million. And you might think, well, if I buy 4 Powerball tickets a week for 15 years, I'm bound to win eventually. No, you're not. Okay, let's be realistic. You have, even buying 4 Powerball tickets every week for 15 years, you're still more likely, everybody, you've all seen Deal or No Deal on TV. You all know how it works. And how many of those have actually won in the last 2, 3, 4 years, however long it's been on TV. You have a better chance still, rather than winning Powerball, buying 4 Powerball tickets a week for 15 years, you still have a better chance of winning Deal or No Deal 2,400 times in a row. In a row. Okay, so next time you play Deal or No Deal or play along on TV and you think you've done it 2,400 times in a row, then you might be lucky enough to actually win the Powerball. You're also more likely to be struck by lightning 7 times in your life than you are to win the Powerball, buying 4 Powerball tickets a week for 15 years. So maybe by the time you've been hit by lightning 5 times, yes, then, okay, maybe you're lucky enough and survived, then you might be lucky enough. So it's not worth it. But you might think, hey, I might win a $200,000 Powerball with those tickets instead. You're still more likely to win Deal or No Deal 63 times in a row. Most people can't win it even once or twice in a row. Okay, so just remember, you're much more likely to just lose all that money altogether. Even those who do win $1 million or a few $1 million, think about a $1 million winner. After taxes, after their lump sum penalty, because most people take a lump sum, they're usually left with maybe $300,000, $400,000. With that money, they buy a new luxury car. They give money, $10,000, $20,000, $40,000, $50,000 to friends or family in cash payments, or buy somebody else a car because, hey, they're millionaires, although they're really not. They quit their job. They take a $25,000 vacation. They buy a second car when they get back, and then they eat out for 2 nice meals every weekend for the year. And at the end of the year, they barely have $100,000 in cash. That doesn't even include paying for groceries, utilities, rent, mortgage. They can't even buy a new home with that. That's reality. Most people who win the lottery don't end up keeping their money. It's blown in a hurry. Stop playing. That's the suggestion. You're not going to win. I'm sorry to say it, but most people the vast majority are not going to win. Take that money instead, invest it in a typical return, and in 15 years, instead of being out $15,000, $16,000 that you put into that lottery, you'll have probably $32,000, $35,000, and that's a pretty good bet. That's a pretty good bet, because even though the market goes down some years, it goes up most years. So talk to an investor, and you'll do much better. Just say, hey, look, I only have $50 a month to invest. You know what? That's fine. That's great. Even if you only had $40 a month, talk to somebody. Talk to a financial planner. Okay, set goals, minimize your expenses, and get rid of all those. So Let's see. I'm going to ask you to repeat after me because I think this is very important. I live by a budget. All right, now I know you probably didn't even say that. So I'm going to ask you again, say it out loud. I live by a budget. Tell yourself that it's got to be emotional buy-in that you live by a budget. Now, even if the person next to you or in the house next to you or in the room next to you hears you, you got to say it. I live by a budget. Because once you say it, you're much more likely to actually do it. We talked about spending plans. If you want some more information, if you want to read through this, go ahead and press the pause button. But remember, consistency is much more important initially than the amount. We talked about working together and having mutual financial goals and working 15 minutes a week to look at your finances. For kids, make sure that they see you budgeting. Make sure that they understand that you don't, especially if you're married, don't go into the back room and hide your budget from your kids, and all they know is that mom and dad went into the back room to fight about money. Stay at the table, kitchen table. They'll start asking questions, even at age 4, 5, 6. They're going to ask you, hey, what are you doing? And if they see it's important to you, they're much more likely to think that it is important for them. By the time they're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, they're old enough to start helping with priorities. They're not, you don't have to accept their counsel every time you say, hey, we have an extra $50 this month. What do you think it should go to? But from time to time, ask them what they think, and accept it. Make sure that they connect their behavior, even very young, that they understand that they need to turn off lights when they leave the room, that they need to close the door in the wintertime or the summertime so that the heat or the cool air-conditioned air doesn't get out. That there is an impact. Their behavior impacts the finances of the house. But do not get your children in or your nieces or nephews in the habit of having $1 or $2 or $5 to spend every time they go shopping with you. They become very entitled. They assume quickly they feel entitled to that money. And children who feel they are entitled to money will be those that will then throw tantrums when they don't get it, even though it should be a gift. Okay, the last passcode is ADAMS, A-D-A-M-S, ADAMS. Okay, very quickly, some other financial habits to be in. Make sure that you are living by a weekly menu. Do you know what you're planning to eat for the next week before you go shopping? That way you can come up with a shopping list, take a calculator, and keep track of how much you have in your cart. That way you can make sure that you avoid spending more than you should. Shop regularly. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but if you only shop when you need something, you're more likely to overshop. You're more likely to buy convenience foods, whereas if you shop regularly, you're much more likely to have a plan, to know what you're looking for, and to spend within your budget. If you shop with plastic rather than cash or a check, you're much more likely to spend extra money. Several studies have shown that people who use credit or debit card, either one, will spend an additional 12 cents for every dollar that somebody spends in cash or check. So, and if you're talking about dining out, it's going to be even probably 40% more than somebody who uses cash or check. So if you're struggling, go with cash or check and leave the credit card or debit card at home. Okay, well, thank you. Now, I appreciate your attention during this webinar. For credit, please go to our website and take the corresponding quiz. It's entitled Budgeting or Your Roadmap to Financial Stability. If you have any questions, there's our mailing address, but you can also call 877-688-3328. Again, 877-688-3328, or send us an email at education@debtreductionservices.org. Education@debtreductionservices.org. Thank you, and I wish you all the best in achieving your financial goals.